I was folding laundry when I got the news. Not through a call, not even through a message. It was a Facebook post, a tagged photo of my daughter in a white dress, standing beneath a floral arch, smiling so wide it hurt to look at. Just married, the caption read, followed by a stream of hearts and champagne emojis. And just like that, I realized I hadn't just been left off the guest list. I'd been erased. I stood there, socks in hand, my knees locked, eyes frozen on the screen. My heart didn't pound, it sank, like something inside me had been dropped down a well with no bottom. She did it, she really did it. My only daughter got married, and didn't even tell me. I didn't cry at first. That came later. The tears didn't fall from grief, they fell from something colder. Like being slapped by someone you thought would never raise their hand to you. I sat down on the edge of the bed, surrounded by laundry that suddenly felt ridiculous. Who folds clothes on the day they lose their child? But maybe I hadn't lost her that day. Maybe I'd been losing her for years. And I just didn't want to see it. The signs were there, subtle at first. A slow distancing, like a boat drifting out to sea while I stood on the shore, waving with a smile that didn't match the panic in my chest. It started around college. She began using phrases I didn't recognize, emotional boundaries, processing space, generational narratives. She said I was too intense. That I made everything about me. I thought she was just growing, expanding. I didn't realize I was the thing she was stepping away from. But I was still her mother. I paid for her tuition. I helped her move. I sent care packages when she was stressed and texted corny jokes just to see if she'd reply. Sometimes she did. Sometimes she didn't. I learned to measure my worth in emojis. Then she met him, Jason. He was charming in that polished, Instagram-ready way. Always quick with a compliment, always putting his hand on her lower back like he owned her happiness. I tried to like him. I really did. But there was something about him that didn't sit right with me. Maybe it was the way he called me Elaine instead of Mom. Or how he'd interrupt me mid-sentence with a smile that never reached his eyes. Still, I bit my tongue. Because that's what mothers do when their daughters fall in love. We stand back, smile politely, and pray it works out. I told myself I was being paranoid. Overprotective. She seemed happy. She posted pictures of brunch dates, matching pajamas, cheesy grins in pumpkin patches. It looked like love, and wasn't that what mattered? But over time, I noticed the tone of her messages change. Shorter replies, less warmth, more careful wording. She started canceling visits. First it was work. Then it was too much going on. Then, no explanation at all. And when I tried to push back, to say I missed her, that I didn't feel included, she said I was being manipulative. That word gutted me, because I wasn't trying to control her. I was trying to stay connected. But in her new world, even wanting closeness came with a penalty. The last time we spoke face to face was at a coffee shop, 6 months before the wedding. I remember because she barely touched her drink. She kept looking at her phone, eyes darting between me and the screen like she had somewhere better to be. I asked her gently if everything was okay. She said she was just tired. I asked about the wedding planning, she changed the subject. I asked if I could help. She looked uncomfortable. That's when I knew, not with certainty, but with a mother's intuition. The kind that whispers things your heart doesn't want to hear. And yet I still waited. I waited for an invitation. A conversation. A chance to be part of the biggest day of her life. I even bought a dress. Navy blue, floor length, with a soft lace overlay. I kept it in the back of my closet, tag still on, waiting like a symbol of hope. Or delusion. And now here I was. Looking at wedding photos online. Scrolling through images of a life I wasn't invited to witness. She looked radiant, glowing, surrounded by people I didn't know. Jason's family, friends from college, not one familiar face from our past. Not even a cousin. I didn't comment. I didn't like the post. I just closed my laptop and sat there, staring at the wall like it might explain something to me. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay in bed replaying everything. The lullabies I used to sing. The scraped knees I kissed. The nights I stayed up worrying when she missed curfew. The birthdays I planned. The sacrifices. The dreams. And for what? To be blocked out of the moment she became a wife? I tried to reason with it. Maybe it was a small ceremony. Maybe it was last minute. Maybe they'd plan a bigger one later and this was just the legal part. But the photos told a different story. This wasn't rushed. This was curated, designed, intentional. She didn't forget me. She excluded me. There's a difference. The next morning, I didn't even bother brushing my hair. I sat at the kitchen table with a cold cup of coffee and stared at the window, watching the world go about its business like nothing had changed. But everything had. My daughter was married, and I wasn't part of it. I was still sitting there, numb and hollow, when the doorbell rang. I didn't move at first. I assumed it was a delivery or a neighbor. But then came the knock. 3 hard, fast raps. Familiar somehow. I stood slowly, my body moving on instinct, and opened the door. And there he was, Jason, my new son-in-law. Still in his suit pants and white shirt, wrinkled now, with the bow tie undone and hanging loose. His hair was messy, his face was red, and his eyes were filled with tears. "I'm sorry," he said. And then he broke down. Right there on my porch. The man who helped cut me out of my own daughter's life. Crying, shaking, begging to come inside, and I let him in. Not because I forgave him. Not because I wanted to hear whatever story he had come to tell. But because in that moment, I saw something I hadn't seen in months. The truth. And I was finally ready to hear it. He stepped inside like someone walking into a church, quiet, trembling, guilty. I could smell the remnants of cologne and sweat on him, the kind of scent that clings after too much emotion in too little time. His hands were shaking. I noticed the cufflink missing from his right sleeve, and a stain on the collar of his shirt. It looked like wine, or blood. I didn't ask. Not yet. He didn't sit down. He just stood there in the entryway, looking like a boy who got caught sneaking out of the house. I offered him no tea. No comfort. Just space. After a minute, he spoke. "I don't know where else to go." I nodded, still silent. He looked at me, eyes rimmed with red, like he hadn't slept. "I'm sorry. For everything. I know you hate me. I probably deserve it." Still, I said nothing. Because I wasn't sure what I felt yet. Rage? Relief? A strange, perverse satisfaction? "Something happened," he said, voice cracking. "At the wedding." The word wedding hit me like a slap. It was real now, not just a post, not just an omission. It had happened, and I had not been there. He lowered himself onto the edge of my sofa like his bones were filled with cement. For a few seconds, he just stared at the floor, hands clasped, jaw clenched. "I don't know how to explain it," he said. "It was like, she wasn't even the same person." "She?" I asked, the word finally breaking from my throat like splintered glass. He didn't look up, just nodded. "Claire, my daughter, my Claire." He started talking, and I listened, not because I wanted to absolve him, but because I needed to understand. To finally pull the thread that would unravel the ugly truth beneath the picture-perfect facade. He told me about the rehearsal dinner, how Claire had insisted on seating charts that excluded half of his family because they wouldn't look right in photos. He told me how she snapped at him in front of the florist because the tulip shade didn't match her palette. How she screamed at her maid of honor for wearing the wrong lashes. How she spent more time coordinating her wedding hashtag than actually speaking to anyone who loved her. But that wasn't the part that made his hands shake. It was what happened that morning. "She called it off," he said quietly. "An hour before the ceremony." I blinked. "But, she got married. There are photos." He gave a dry, humorless laugh. "She changed her mind, then changed it back, then threatened to sue me if I left." I stared at him, disoriented. "What do you mean, sue you?" She said I owed her. For the photos. For the venue. For the emotional labor. She said she'd ruin me. Said she'd make sure no one ever dated me again. She said if I didn't go through with it, she'd tell everyone I was abusive. The words hung in the air like smoke. I wanted to deny it. To say, "That's not my daughter." But the truth? I could hear her voice in those threats. The tone. The cadence. The clinical way she detached from empathy when things didn't go her way. "She changed into the dress 10 minutes before walking down the aisle," he continued. "Didn't even look at me during the vows. And afterward, she told me not to touch her. Not to speak to her unless it was for photos." I felt the ground tilt beneath me. But still, I didn't cry. Because deep down, this wasn't news. It was confirmation. Then came the part one didn't expect. "She made me block you," he said. "She made me delete you from my phone." My throat closed. "She said you were manipulative." That you'd try to control the wedding. That you'd embarrass her. She told everyone you were mentally unstable. That you had boundary issues. She made up entire stories about things you said. Things you never said. He finally looked at me. I believed her. There it was. The confession. The weight. The betrayal. I didn't respond. I couldn't. My brain was screaming, but my body was frozen. I was wrong, he said. But I didn't know. I didn't want to make things worse. I thought she was just stressed. But she wasn't stressed. She was cruel. And then he did something I didn't expect. He cried. Not the performative kind. Not the crocodile tear type. But the deep, shaking sobs of someone who finally saw the monster under the bed and realized they had helped feed it. I should have felt vindicated. Instead, I felt hollow. Because in that moment, I realized something that shattered me more than the wedding ever could. Claire hadn't become this person overnight. This wasn't stress, or pressure, or cold feet. This was who she had been becoming for years. And I had missed it. Or ignored it. Or worse, enabled it. I think I married someone who doesn't love anyone, he said. Not really. Not unless they're useful. The sentence hit me so hard, I flinched. Because that wasn't just about him. It was about me. All those years of showing up, giving, bending, shrinking, only to be labeled difficult the moment I asked for reciprocity. All the holidays where she arrived late, left early, and rolled her eyes at the gifts I chose. The birthdays where I got a group text instead of a call. The way she used my grief as an inconvenience when I lost my sister, telling me she didn't have the bandwidth for my emotional processing. I thought it was generational. I thought she was just different. But maybe she was broken in ways I couldn't fix. He wiped his face with his sleeve. I didn't know where else to go. I don't have anyone left. My parents are furious. My friends think I'm insane. Her parents. He stopped. Sorry, you know what I mean. I did. He wasn't wrong. He looked up again. Can I stay here? Just for a day or two? I didn't answer right away. Not out of spite, but because I needed to remember who I was now. The woman who no longer said yes just to keep the peace. The woman who didn't mistake compassion for self-sacrifice. You can stay in the guest room, I said. His shoulders dropped with relief. Thank you. I nodded and stood. But after that, we figure out what's next. You and me? We're not family. We're just two people burned by the same fire. And for the first time in what felt like years, I saw myself clearly. Not as the mother, not as the victim, but as the survivor. I hadn't shared space with a man in years, not since my husband died. And now, here I was, brushing my teeth in silence while the man who married my daughter slept in the guest room like a refugee from his own life. The strangeness of it didn't escape me, but it also didn't shake me. I was past the point of being surprised. The deeper betrayal cuts, the harder it is to flinch. The first morning, I made coffee and sat at the kitchen table, listening for sounds from the back of the house. I expected awkwardness, maybe excuses. Instead, I heard nothing. Just the creak of the floorboards when he eventually got up, and the soft sound of the shower. He didn't come out until almost noon. I didn't sleep, he said. I didn't comment. He poured himself coffee and sat across from me, hands wrapped around the mug like he was trying to draw strength from the heat. He looked smaller in the daylight. Not physically, but energetically. Deflated, like the illusion he had been clinging to finally crumbled in his hands. We didn't talk much that day. He spent most of it pacing the backyard, phone in hand, reading messages, then deleting them. I knew who they were from. Claire, probably alternating between rage and justification. That was her way, break something, then demand thanks for how well she swept it up. I didn't ask what she said. I didn't want to hear it. Not yet. Instead, I spent the afternoon cleaning the linen closet. It's funny the things you do when your life unravels. Some people drink, some sleep. I organize. I refold towels and match pillowcases, like order in the cabinets might fix the chaos in my chest. But it doesn't. That night, I lay in bed with the lights off, staring at the ceiling. My body was tired, but my mind was relentless. Not with rage, with memory. I thought back to when Claire was small. The way she used to cry if I left the room. How she clung to my leg in public. How she used to say, "You're my best friend, Mommy." I remember feeling needed, essential, like the sun she revolved around. And I remember the first time she pulled away. It wasn't dramatic. just a closed door, a rolled eye, a new friend whose mother wasn't so intense. I told myself it was normal. Teenage years, boundaries, independence. But looking back now, I see the pattern. Love, for Claire, was always conditional. Be useful, be easy, be selfless, and above all, be silent. I failed her only once, the day I started asking to be seen as a person. I remembered the year she graduated. I offered to help pay for graduate school. She said no, not because she didn't need help, she did, but because she didn't want strings attached. The string, in her mind, was me. I represented guilt, obligation, emotional inconvenience. She wanted money, not history. Gratitude, not presence. And the moment I couldn't deliver that cleanly, she began the slow process of removing me. Subtly, strategically, like pruning a tree to make room for better light. By the time Jason entered the picture, I was already half cut. And now here he was, cut too. On the second morning, he handed me his phone. "You should see this," he said. I hesitated, but took it. The screen showed a stream of texts from Claire. Dozens of them, some frantic, some passive-aggressive, some cold as stone. "I knew you'd do this. Can't believe you're with her. You're both narcissists. Tell her to stop playing the victim. You're not safe until you fix this." I stared at those words. Not for their content, but for their tone. That wasn't heartbreak. That was war. And I was the new enemy. "She doesn't care that I'm gone," Jason said quietly. "She cares that someone saw behind the curtain." I believed him, because I had lived behind that curtain for years. Smiling, justifying, pretending. Claire wasn't born cruel. But somewhere along the way, she learned that power came from control. And when you give someone like that access to your soul, they don't love it. They manage it. And when you stop being manageable, they erase you. That's what the wedding was. An erasure. She had rewritten the story of her life to exclude me. Not because I was harmful, but because I didn't fit the image she wanted to present. I was messy, emotional, honest, and that made me a liability. Jason put the phone down. She said she only invited people who understood the assignment. That's what she called it. A branding exercise, a curated life moment. I shook my head, not because I didn't believe it, but because I did. That night, he packed his things. Not because I asked, but because he understood this wasn't a rescue mission. It was a reckoning. "I'm going to stay with a friend for a bit," he said. "Thank you for not slamming the door in my face." I nodded. "Don't mistake my kindness for complicity." "I don't," he said. "Not anymore." He left quietly. No hug, no closure, just the soft click of the door as it shut behind him. And then I was alone. Again. But this time, it didn't feel like a punishment. It felt like a choice. The next morning, I made breakfast. Real breakfast. Eggs, toast, jam. I sat at the table and ate slowly, savoring every bite like it was a ritual. And when I finished, I did something I hadn't done in years. I blocked Claire's number. Not out of spite, but for peace. Because every time her name lit up my screen, I braced myself. For blame, for cruelty, for manipulation disguised as a check-in. I was done bracing. I spent the day walking through the neighborhood. It was quiet, peaceful. A woman I knew from the library waved at me. I waved back. I passed a child riding a bike, her mother jogging behind. For a moment, I felt a pang of nostalgia. The echo of a life I once had. The sweetness of early motherhood. Before it all got twisted. But then it passed. Because I wasn't that woman anymore. I was someone else now. Someone older, sharper, tired, yes, but clear. That evening, I received an email. Subject line: "You owe me." No greeting, no warmth. Just, "Jason left. Everyone's blaming me. I know it's because you got in his head. You never supported me. You always made it about you. Don't act like the victim here. You've ruined my marriage. If you care about me at all, you'll fix this." I read it once, then again, and I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was so predictable, it almost felt scripted. I didn't reply. Instead, I wrote in my journal, "Some daughters don't want mothers. They want mirrors." I shattered mine the day I said no. Then I closed the notebook, turned off my phone, and made a cup of tea. Because I was done parenting a grown woman who refused to grow. And for the first time, I didn't feel broken. I felt free. The days that followed were quiet. Not empty, quiet. There's a difference. Emptiness is absence. Quiet is space. I hadn't known the difference until now. I used to fill every hour with noise, calls, cleaning, errands, apologies. I called it staying busy, but it was really just fear wearing a mask. Fear that if I ever stopped, I'd have to feel the weight of what I'd been holding in for decades. But no, I wasn't afraid of the weight anymore. I welcomed it, sat with it, let it pass through me like a storm through dry earth. Let it crack open parts of me I had plastered shut. I started going to the community center. Not to meet people, just to be around them. I'd sit in the reading room with a book I never finished, sipping tea that always got cold. I watched women laugh, old men argue over chess, kids run down the hallway with noisy shoes. I didn't speak, but I watched. I existed, and for once, that felt like enough. I began waking up early again. Not out of obligation, but instinct. I liked the stillness of 6 a.m. The way the sky blued like it was waking up with me. I'd open the window, breathe in the air, and think, this is mine. This breath, this moment, no one can take this from me. I started cooking again, not for guests, not for family, just for me. I made stews that filled the apartment with warmth, muffins that no one would compliment but still tasted like comfort. I began lighting candles in the evening. Not for romance, for reverence. Every once in a while, I'd think about Claire. Not the current Claire, the one who wrote emails full of accusations, but the little girl version. The one who once climbed into bed with me during a thunderstorm, whispered, "I feel safe here," and fell asleep with her hand on my heart. I missed that version, but I knew she wasn't coming back. That version of her was gone. And in a strange way, so was that version of me. Because I wasn't a mother anymore. Not in the way the world defines it. I had no one calling, no one needing, no one measuring my value by the warmth of my arms or the size of my casseroles. I was no longer a point of reference in someone else's life. I was just me, and at first, that felt like grief. But slowly, it began to feel like birth. The birth of someone who had never fully been allowed to exist. One afternoon, I walked past a church thrift shop I'd never noticed before. Something pulled me in, maybe the way the light hit the window. Maybe just curiosity. Inside, it smelled like old books and lavender and thyme. I browsed slowly, letting my fingers trail over things that once belonged to other people. Then I saw her. A woman, about my age. White hair pulled into a bun. Strong shoulders. She was setting out a tray of mugs, humming to herself. I don't know why, but I said hello. She looked up, smiled. "You look like you just remembered something." "Maybe I did," I said. She offered me tea. We sat in the back, surrounded by forgotten things. And we talked. Her name was Margaret. She had 2 sons, neither of whom spoke to her anymore. "Divorced," she said simply. "Their father poisoned them against me when I left. They chose a version of the story that made them feel righteous. It's easier that way." I nodded. "Daughters do it, too." She looked at me, really looked. And then she said something I'll never forget. "We're the generation that got tired of being grateful for scraps." I blinked. Tears pricked my eyes. "Yes," I said. "Exactly that. We met for tea every Thursday after that. Not because we were lonely. But because we were tired of pretending we weren't. We didn't try to fix each other. We just let each other speak. We told the truth. About motherhood. About aging. About the lies we'd swallowed and the dreams we'd shelved. I told her about Claire. About the wedding. About Jason. She didn't gasp. She didn't offer cliches. She just listened. And then said, "You didn't fail. You just stopped playing the part." And I realized that was it. I had stopped being what everyone expected. The quiet mother. The bottomless well. The forgiving doormat. The ever-available backup plan. And that wasn't a betrayal. It was a return to myself. One morning, I sat down with a notebook and wrote a list titled, "Things I no longer feel guilty for." Not being invited, saying no, wanting kindness, not explaining myself, letting go. I taped it to the fridge. It became my scripture. I stopped watching Claire's life online. I blocked her posts. Not because I hated her, but because I didn't want to bleed every time she smiled for a camera I wasn't allowed to be near. She wasn't the only one allowed to curate a life. So I curated mine, not with filters, but with boundaries. I took a short trip to the coast. Alone. I walked on the beach, shoes in hand, let the cold water bite at my ankles. I wrote postcards I didn't send. I bought myself a necklace from a street vendor, silver, with a tiny wave on it. It reminded me that even the ocean doesn't apologize for pulling back. And I wouldn't either. It had been 3 weeks since Jason left, and 2 since I blocked Claire's number. I thought the silence would be terrifying. But it was something else entirely, liberating. Like walking out of a room filled with smoke and finally taking a full breath. I'd been holding it in for years. I spent my mornings reading and my afternoons walking. I met with Margaret twice a week now. Sometimes we didn't even talk. We just sat on the library patio and watched the world move without asking us to catch up. It was a strange kind of healing. Slow, uneventful, deep. Then she showed up. Not a call, not a message, not even a warning, just a knock on my door. I knew it was her the second I heard it. There was a particular rhythm to the way she knocked. Impatient, sharp, the kind that always made me feel like I was already in trouble. I opened the door and there she was. Claire, my daughter. She looked thinner than I remembered. Tense. Her eyes had that glossy sheen of someone running on too much caffeine and not enough rest. She wore black, as always, like armor. Her mouth was tight, her arms crossed. We stood there for a moment, neither of us speaking. And then she said, "So you're just done? You're just giving up on me?" The absurdity of it almost made me laugh. I hadn't heard from her in months. She'd banned me from her wedding, lied about me, painted me as the villain. And now she stood here, accusing me of giving up? I didn't answer. She stepped inside, uninvited, like she always used to. Like this was still her territory. Her world. Her script. I let her. Because I needed to see it, to face the ghost of the guilt that had haunted me for decades. She walked straight to the kitchen and turned. "Jason's gone. He left me. You must be thrilled." I said nothing. "You got exactly what you wanted, didn't you?" That made me blink. What exactly did I want, Claire? She rolled her eyes. "You've always hated him." I shook my head. "I didn't hate him. I saw through him. The same way I saw through you." She flinched. "Not much. Just a flicker. But I saw it." "You think you're so righteous now," she snapped. "Just because you blocked me? Because you think you're healing or whatever? You're just bitter. You always have been." I felt nothing. And that terrified her. Because I used to cry. I used to plead. I used to apologize just for existing too loudly. But now, I stood in front of her, calm as stone, and watched her unravel. "I lost everything," she said. "Do you even care?" And for the first time in my life, I answered her honestly. "No." She stared at me like I'd slapped her. "I care that you're a human being. That you're in pain. But I no longer care more about your life than I do about mine. That stopped the moment you treated me like a stain you had to scrub out of your wedding." She started to speak. I held up my hand. "No more gaslighting, Claire. No more blame. You want to talk? Talk. But talk like an adult. Not a child who can't handle consequences." She stared at me. Her eyes flickered between rage and something that looked almost like grief. And that's when I saw it. The crack. Not in her facade. In the fantasy. The fantasy where I would always be the one to chase her. To beg. To bend. That fantasy had just died. And she didn't know who she was without it. She sat down at the table, arms limp now, face pale. "I'm scared," she said quietly. "I don't know who I am anymore." I didn't move, not because I didn't care, but because I finally understood that my job wasn't to rescue her. It was to free myself from the job altogether. "You're 32, Claire. It's time you figured that out." She looked up, blinking. "So that's it? You're done being my mom?" And there it was, the trap. Because that question wasn't about love. It was about obligation, about leverage, about trying to make me feel guilty for walking away from a contract I never signed. So I said what needed to be said. "I will always be your mother. But I am no longer your caretaker. I am no longer your punching bag. I am no longer the audience to your victim act. If you want a relationship, you'll have to build one. From scratch. With truth. With respect. With time. And I won't wait forever." She didn't respond. She just sat there. I poured myself tea. Didn't offer her any. She stayed for 20 minutes, mostly in silence. And then she left. No hug. No promises. No apology. Just a woman who realized her story no longer worked in my house. That night, I cried. Not for the daughter I had. But for the mother I used to be. The one who thought love meant sacrifice. Who thought being needed was the same as being valued? Who thought if she just held on long enough, the pain would turn back into tenderness? But that mother was gone now. And in her place stood someone new. Someone who didn't flinch when her daughter raised her voice. Someone who didn't beg for crumbs of affection. Someone who no longer mistook proximity for love. And as I stood by the window, watching the taillights fade down the street, I whispered to myself, this is what breaking the cycle feels like. Quiet, strong, final. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual. The sun hadn't fully risen, and the world still carried that soft, blue-gray hush that feels almost sacred. I sat at the window with a blanket wrapped around my shoulders and let the quiet settle over me. My body ached in that familiar, middle-aged way, but my chest was light. Hollow, yes, but not in the way it used to be. Not like grief, more like space had been cleared. Claire was gone, not gone. She still existed, still walked the earth with her sharp words and curated anger. But she no longer lived in my head. Her weight, which had hung on my shoulders like a wet coat for decades, had finally slipped off. And I had no intention of picking it back up. I spent the day cleaning. Not out of compulsion, but clarity. I opened windows, scrubbed the grout, shook out the rugs. It felt like exorcism by way of vinegar and lemon oil. Every surface I touched seemed to sigh with relief. Like the house, too, had grown tired of carrying the story of a woman who never said no. By noon, I'd rearranged the furniture. I moved the armchair by the window, where the light was better. I took down an old photo of Claire that hung in the hallway, not in anger, but acceptance. I replaced it with a landscape painting I'd found at the thrift store. Mountains, solid, silent, unbothered. I realized I had spent so much of my life decorating my home around other people's comfort. Framed photos, sentimental gifts, things I never liked but kept because they reminded someone else of something important. But what about me? What reminded me of me? That afternoon, I sat down and wrote a letter to Claire. Not to send, just to say what needed to be said. Claire, I've loved you for longer than you've loved anything. I raised you from nothing. Fed you, protected you, cheered for you even when you resented the sound of my voice. I have made peace with the fact that you may never understand the shape of that kind of love. That you may never want to. But I want you to know this, I no longer seek your approval. I no longer fear your absence. I no longer carry your anger like it's mine to fix. I forgive you, and I release you. I hope one day you choose peace. But if not, that is your life to live. Not mine to mourn. I folded the letter and placed it in a drawer. Then I poured myself a glass of wine and stepped out onto the porch, letting the breeze play with my hair. For the first time in decades, I didn't feel like a mother. I felt like a woman. Whole, quiet, free. The next week passed in a blur of ordinary joy. I took a painting class. Awful results, but lovely people. I started going to the farmer's market again and learned the names of every vendor. I baked muffins just to give them away. People started noticing. At first, it was small things. A compliment on my earrings. You look good today at the grocery store. Margaret said, you seem taller. Maybe I was. Because when you stop shrinking for other people, you grow. Claire texted a few times. Short, sharp probes. So you're just ignoring me now? You really think you're the victim in all this? You've always been dramatic. I didn't block her again. I just didn't answer. Not every silence is surrender. Sometimes, it's the loudest boundary you can draw. One evening, I sat with Margaret at her kitchen table. We were peeling apples for pie, our hands working in quiet rhythm. She looked up and said, do you ever think about going back? Rebuilding it? I knew what she meant. Claire, the family, the myth. I thought for a long moment. Then I said, I used to think motherhood was forever. Now I think it's just a chapter. And some chapters don't need sequels. She nodded. You're not broken, you know. Just rewritten. That night, I slept without waking once. And in the morning, I made a decision. I booked a trip. Just a short one. Coastal. Nothing fancy. But enough to remind myself that my world was bigger than 4 walls and a last name. When the travel agent asked for emergency contact info, I paused. Then I wrote Margaret's name. And smiled. The train ride was slow, the kind that forces you to pay attention to the passing scenery whether you want to or not. Trees blurred, small towns slipped past, rivers glinted in the afternoon sun. I sat by the window with a paperback I never opened. My mind was full but not heavy, the way a cup is full when you finally pour for yourself first. It wasn't a grand vacation. Just a quiet coastal town with a bed and breakfast that smelled like salt and lavender. But it was mine, chosen by me, paid for with money I didn't explain to anyone. For the first time in decades, I didn't need to justify my joy. The innkeeper, a woman in her 70s named Louise, greeted me with the kind of warmth that didn't demand anything in return. "No, who are you here with? No visiting family? Just a key, a smile, and a simple, 'You're in room 3. Ocean view." I unpacked slowly, folded my clothes into the dresser, hung my sweater on a wooden peg. I sat on the bed and listened to the gulls outside, the wind nudging the window panes like an old friend saying, "You made it." The next morning, I wandered into a small cafe and overheard a group of older women laughing in the corner. I don't know what made me do it, maybe the way one of them threw her head back without caring who was watching, but I asked if I could sit with them. They said yes. Their names were Judith, Fran, and Teresa. All widowed, all in their late 60s or early 70s, all with grown children they didn't speak to anymore, or barely did. Judith said her son only called when he needed money. Fran's daughter accused her of emotional sabotage after she moved out of their shared home. Teresa said her kids were too busy and told her to journal her feelings instead of guilt-tripping them. And we laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was familiar. Because we'd all learned the same thing too late, that a mother's love, when taken for granted, becomes a leash. We sat there for hours, swapping stories and slices of pie. No one tried to fix anyone. No one offered advice. We just nodded, clinked coffee cups, and let the truth be enough. That evening, I walked along the shore, shoes in hand, waves lapping at my ankles. The horizon stretched wide and indifferent, and for once, I didn't feel small under it. I felt matched, equal. I sat on a driftwood log and let myself remember without pain. Claire's first steps, her high school graduation, the sound of her laughter before it turned sharp. I didn't rewrite it. I didn't demonize her. I just let it be what it was, a story that changed chapters. I pulled out my journal and wrote, "I am no longer mourning the absence of someone who never truly saw me. I am celebrating the presence of someone I finally do, myself." The next day, I found a tiny bookstore tucked between a fish market and a bait shop. I wandered inside and lost myself in old paperbacks and the scent of leather and ink. The owner, a soft-spoken man with thick glasses, handed me a used copy of a memoir called The Day I Stopped Apologizing. I bought it without hesitation. Back at the inn, I read the whole thing in one sitting. It wasn't profound. It wasn't even well written. But it was honest. A woman telling her truth, raw and clumsy and free. And that's when I knew what I'd do next. I would write mine, not to publish, not to prove anything, just to gather the pieces of myself that had scattered across other people's narratives for far too long. I started that night. I wrote about the casserole dishes I made for holidays where no one showed up. About the voicemail I left on Claire's birthday that she never returned. About the ache of watching your child walk into a life you paid for, and then slam the door behind them. But I also wrote about the small joys. The day Margaret said, "You're not broken, just rewritten." The way the ocean sounded when I let go of the fantasy. The taste of tea that wasn't made for anyone else. The quiet thrill of not being needed. And as I wrote, I realized something that startled me. I wasn't angry anymore. Not really. The bitterness had drained. The sorrow, too. What remained was something quieter. Cleaner. Like a wound that didn't ache when pressed. Just a scar that reminded me of how far I'd come. On my last day, I left a note for Louise at the front desk. Thank you, not for the room, but for reminding me that I am allowed to take up space. I boarded the train home feeling taller somehow. Not because anything magical had happened, but because nothing had, and that had been enough. No one apologized, no one changed, but I did, and that was everything. The train pulled into the station just after sunset. The sky was streaked in colors no camera could capture properly, lavender, gold, a deep orange that looked like it had been soaked in honey. I stepped off the platform with a small suitcase and no sense of urgency. There was no one waiting for me, no one to report to, and for the first time, I found that comforting. My apartment welcomed me like an old friend. The scent of lavender still lingered in the pillows. The list on my fridge, things I no longer feel guilty for, was still taped up, now slightly curled at the edges. I added another item to it with a Sharpie, not responding. Because while I was away, I had received another email from Claire. I hadn't opened it, not immediately, not because I feared what it said, but because I already knew. I unpacked first, washed my face, lit a candle, made myself tea, and then, sitting on the couch wrapped in a blanket, I opened the message. It began without a greeting. Just, "I heard you went away." "Of course you did." Then came the rest. Lines full of cold accusation. Thinly veiled insults. Attempts at guilt dressed up as concern. "I don't know who you think you are, acting like the victim in all this. You abandoned your only child. You're clearly enjoying all the attention you get now for playing the 'poor mother' card. You've changed, and not in a good way. But I guess this is who you've always been, deep down. Thanks for showing your true colors." I closed the laptop gently. I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I didn't even feel the need to defend myself. Because for the first time, I saw the message for what it truly was, a reflection of her discomfort with my peace. Her grief over losing control. Her rage that I no longer twisted myself into a shape that fit her story. She was angry because I no longer made myself small for her comfort. And that wasn't my problem to solve. The next day, I bought myself flowers. Not for a birthday, not for a holiday, just because they were beautiful, and I deserved to look at something blooming. I placed them in a vase on the table and stood back. The apartment felt lighter, airier, like a weight had been lifted that I hadn't realized I was still carrying. I went through old boxes, things I'd kept out of sentiment, but now looked at with new eyes. Cards that said "Thanks Mom" in her handwriting. Drawings from childhood. Photos from birthdays where I smiled but felt like a guest in my own life. I kept a few, let go of the rest. I didn't need artifacts to prove I'd loved her. I knew, and that was enough. A few days later, Margaret came over with scones and a new library book she thought I'd like. We sat on the balcony, letting the wind tangle our hair, our conversation drifting like the leaves. "You seem different," she said. "I am," I replied. "Do you miss her?" I thought for a moment. I miss the idea of her. The version I believed existed. But I don't miss being small. Or scared. Or sad. Margaret nodded. "That's growth." "No," I said. "That's peace." We clinked teacups. That night, I wrote the final entry in my journal. I no longer mourn the daughter I thought I had. I honor the mother I've become. I do not live for reconciliation. I live for truth. And the truth is this: I survived the slow erosion of myself by people who said they loved me. I stopped the bleeding. I sewed myself up. And I lived. I closed the journal and placed it on the shelf. And then, I did something I never thought I'd do. I threw myself a celebration. No invitations. No cake. No big production. Just me. I made my favorite meal. Played music I loved. Wore the softest sweater I owned. Lit every candle in the apartment. I called it my day. Not my birthday. Not Mother's Day. Not any day society gave me. Just a day I claimed. The anniversary of the day I finally chose myself. And it was perfect. Because I didn't need anyone else to make it matter. I had already learned the most important lesson of all. That the loudest love isn't always the truest. That being needed isn't the same as being cherished. And that sometimes, the most radical thing a woman can do, is stop begging to be loved. And start loving herself enough to leave the table where she's only ever been served shame.